Greetings once again. Thank you for joining me as we continue our look at the book of Daniel. This time we are in chapter 5, where the title is Handwriting on the Wall. This is a phrase common use today, as a number of other phrases that are in our language that actually come from Scripture. We'll bump into another one here right quick. So obviously something is happening that's so obvious to everybody that it's like the handwriting's on the wall for this event, and we'll get right into it here. All right, so King Belshazar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. Let's pause for a moment, realize we've got a new king here. We were talking about King Nebuchadnezzar. Now we're talking about King Belshazar. There's no other introduction to this new king yet, but we do have this. He has some place to meet where 1,000 people can get together to get drunk. All right, we're going to have a party here. We're going to have a big banquet, and we're going to have a lot of drinking going on. And so that's what's happening on this occasion, where Belshazar, I think he was a king for about 3 or so years before this happened. Now, then we go on. While Belshazar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. So, hey, everybody, I got this neat idea. Let's take some precious things from some other culture here. We'll use all the goblets from the Jews, all right? Well, they were called Hebrews at the time, but we're going to use their stuff from their temple. And this is sacrilegious, of course, but he was probably too much in his cups to know that expression, or to understand that this was so wrong for him to do. But that's what he ordered. I want you to take a note of the fact that he was drinking there so that his wives were involved in this too. That'll come up here in a little bit. So there are all these people, the nobles and the king's wives and the king's concubines, are all there having this banquet, having a good time. So we see him being a person of insolence and ignorance. He should have known better than to use religious sacred objects for something that was very irreligious and very unsacred. So they brought the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They all wanted to somehow put down this other religion. They had conquered, all right? Babylonia had conquered the Judeans, and so obviously we're better. We can take their stuff if we want to. And they drank the wine, and in doing so, they didn't say praise the God of heaven. They praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. All right? They're praising the gods that are these little images that they carved and sold in their markets. Say, oh, well, let's worship these gods instead. Well, this doesn't go over well with the Lord. He's going to hold people accountable. So we have here, verse 5, suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster on the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale. He was frightened. He was so frightened his knees knocked together and his legs gave way. Here's another expression you've heard probably several times in your life. Somebody was so terrified that their knees knocked together. Where does that phrase come from? Oh yeah, Daniel chapter 5. Right, we got it right here. His knees are knocking together. Belshazzar has seen something, and you might say, boy, what's the matter with him? But if you had ever had the occasion where you're sitting around with friends, you notice the wall, and there's this hand writing on the wall, and that you don't see an arm, you don't see a person, just this hand. We don't know how big it was, but it's leaving writing on the wall. There's plaster there, and now there's something written there. It's like the hand almost had some brush in it or something to leave some words there. The king is terrified because he's never seen something like this before. How can there be this hand there? How can it do writing? And what in the world does it all mean? The king called out for his enchanters, his astrologers, his diviners to be brought, and said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means, well, he'll be clothed in purple and have a gold chain put around his neck. We'll make him the third highest ruler in the kingdom. All right, now we're going to come back to why this person will be third highest. But he is so desperate to know What is this on the wall? Explain what happened here. So he's willing to promote somebody to the third place in the kingdom. As I say, I'll get back to that later. But he's desperate. I got to know what this means. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they couldn't read the writing. They couldn't tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazar became even more terrified. His face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. They knew it meant something. And all this whole room full of people, maybe some were sitting too far back, but a lot of them would have noticed what the king noticed. There's this hand there, and it's writing on the wall. We got to know what this means, and we don't. Nobody can read the writing or interpret it. Obviously, you can't interpret it till you know what it says, but they're watching the hand right on the wall. Now, verse 10 introduces another character who was not present before. The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. Apparently, the person we call the queen was not there with Belshazar, his nobles, his wives, and his concubines. This other woman is the queen. And so she comes in here and says, "O king, live forever," she said. "Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, I say, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners." So here Belshazar, now coming to power, has brought in his own entourage, and he doesn't have any knowledge or respect of what had gone before. So he's got his own little council here, his own cabinet, if you will, and they can't solve the problem. But somebody coming in has somebody in mind. This person is the queen. Since this woman is a queen but not the king's wife, we can readily assume that this was a woman who was previously married to someone who is no longer around, such as Nebuchadnezzar. And so we got the king's ancestor here. Is this his mother or his stepmother, his grandmother? This woman who is still like the queen, and the king is now being told, hey, there is somebody who can solve the problem, who can read this and tell you what it means. So she goes on. This man, Daniel, who the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he'll tell you what the writing means. Call for Daniel. Notice she does not say call for Belteshazzar, because in her mind and in that of her king, Nebuchadnezzar, we know this man who they gave him a new name, but he never gave in to that religion, and he was not celebrating the god Bel. He was still worshiping his own god, the Jewish god, who's the king of creation. And she'll recognize him as that too. So she hasn't been present, but now she deigns to call in and give some extra information. Call for Daniel. So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, "Are you him? Yeah? Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? I've heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and you have insight, intelligence, understanding, and wisdom. You're the guy. We need help. Can you help us here?" So he says, "The wise men, enchanters, who brought up before me to read this and tell me what it means, but hey, they couldn't do it. They could not explain it. Now I've heard that you are able to interpret. You can give interpretations, you can solve the riddles, you can tell us what this writing says and what it means, and if you can, I'll give you the same offer I gave them. We'll clothe you in purple, we'll get a gold chain around your neck, you can be made the third highest ruler in the whole kingdom." Again, that comment about third highest, and again, I'm coming back to that in a little bit. So this is the offer. King Belshazar says, I got to know what it says here. What are those words? And what do they mean? Daniel doesn't buy into this. Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means." Get ready. Here comes the sermon. All right? Daniel has not been known to Belshazar. And so now he finally gets called in when there's a need for his presence, and he's going to give the whole load to this man who should have been more cognizant of his history, like a lot of us should be, and also more aware of who God really is and how he should be respected. So he comes in, and almost like a big chip on his shoulder, this man who was so trusted by Nebuchadnezzar and so ignored by Belshazar and his God as well. So you keep your prize. I don't want it. But I'll tell you what it says. But before he tells him what it says, he gives him the sermon. O king, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the peoples and nations and men of every language dreaded and feared him. Right? God did this for Nebuchadnezzar. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. He could do whatever because God had put him in this position. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. You and I know this from the previous chapter. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys, ate grass like cattle. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and sets over them anyone he pleases. My God is God, and he's in charge. Nebuchadnezzar had to learn this the hard way. I'm sorry the message didn't get traveled down to you, but that's what it is. God's in charge. He became arrogant, and so he suffered for it until he was willing to acknowledge God. But you, his son, O Belshazar, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. Bad idea. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you had your nobles and your wives and your concubines drink wine from them. All right? You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But that's what you used to do your drinking. God's stuff for your purposes. You did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. All right? He's not beating around the bush here, is he? It's right in your face. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is what the inscription that was written. All right? Here's what is written there. And it just looks like gobbledygook to you and me, and it certainly did to all of the men there from Belshazar in Babylon. And he says, that says, mene, mene, tekel upharsin. All right? That's what it is, these words here. Now, that's what the words are. Let me explain these to you, okay? This is what these words mean. Mene means numbered, all right? God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Matter of fact, it says mene, mene. It's been, like Santa Claus taking a list and checking it twice. Well, God numbered, he checked it out, and sure enough, your days are done. You have rejected God. You've been arrogant in your ways. Time's up, Belshazar. Your days are over. Your reign is at an end. Tekel, the next word, and that means judgment here. And weighed, it's kind of like on a scale here. And we put you on a scale and where you should have been, and you're a lightweight here. You've been weighed on the scale. You've been found wanting. You aren't what God wanted or expected of you. Peres, the last word here. Peres means divided. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. You're done. Not only are you going to be done, but your whole kingdom is going to be turned over to somebody else. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. All right, now I'm going to tell you why it says third highest. Because the word here for father used here, it could equally be translated as ancestor. And so when it talks about the Nebuchadnezzar's being his father, we could have been talking about your ancestor such as grandfather. And a lot of historians are telling us that Belshazzar's father was actually a guy named Nabonidus. that when Nabonidus takes over after Nebuchadnezzar dies, he's saying this kingdom is too big. The vastness of the Babylonian Empire, with the kind of communication they had then, was so inefficient. So I'll take that side of the kingdom, Nabonidus says, and Belshazzar, you take that side over there. All right, we'll split it up and work at it. So we've already got two kings. And so when Belshazzar wants to promote somebody, he can't offer him half the kingdom like Herod did to Salome when she did her exotic dance there and asked for the head of John the Baptist. No, what Belshazzar can do is say, I can make you third highest. It's after Dad and I. That's where. So we'll let you do that. I put the screen also up here to give you a bigger picture. Remember, Daniel came on scene as a captive back at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and he lives here for the rest of his life, through not only the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, but that of Nabonidus and Belshazar. We'll see him continuing on in the book here with the reign of Darius the Mede, son of Xerxes, and then also during the reign of Cyrus, the Persian, who will be taking over after the Medes and Persians. Daniel lives through all of this and remains in a position of a good counselor for whoever is in charge, if they're wise enough to accept his teaching. Why do some people have to learn the hard way? Why did this have to happen? It didn't. But like for a lot of times, you and I are just mistaking our ways. We're in too big a hurry. We're not listening, whatever. Belshazzar had ignored history. He didn't take a lesson from what happened to his father and decide to become a follower of the living God. No, he ignored all that kind of stuff. And so he ends up with the handwriting on the wall and his knees knocking. So this chapter ends with that very night after this party, Belshazar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So he's an older man, but now the Medes are in charge of this area here. Darius will be in charge where Belshazar was, because Belshazar was going to learn the hard way. This should be a lesson in itself to each and every one of us. I don't want to learn the lessons the hard way if there's an easier way to do it. You might remember the lessons you learned the hard way, but God can also bless us, so we don't have to learn all those lessons difficult at all. Let's not have to do that. And one quick rule here: anytime you're about making a decision, thinking about doing something, losing your temper or changing things drastically, whatever it might be, here's the rule we get from here. You have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. When you see yourself doing something like that, stop and remember, that's not what I want to do. And when you want to start saying, I want to be this, I want to do that, maybe here's a lesson also where God is saying he can use you right now, wherever you are, to do his will. You can have him set you up in your position. You can bloom where you're planted and be a blessing to others around you who need to learn some of these lessons, but do not have to learn them the hard way. I'm doing this on Father's Day weekend here in North Iowa 2024, and so I'll just add this thought, especially to all you men, but certainly it applies to the women as well. We can be those role models that can help the younger generation not have to learn the hard way by making sure that the message gets passed on. Nebuchadnezzar changed his religion, but it didn't affect Belshazar. Pass on what you know. Bloom where you're planted and pass on your faith to the next generations so they won't set themselves up against the God of heaven and live to regret it. May God bless you this weekend and throughout the year, and be reading the next chapter. It's going to be an exciting one too as we get into more of Daniel. Thanks for listening.